This happened to my uncle, who lives in a remote cabin up in British Columbia. I was staying with him for the winter holidays 2 years ago. His place is isolated, no neighbors, no Wi-Fi, and the nearest town is about 40 minutes down a winding road. It's peaceful, but sometimes the silence is a little too loud. One night, during a heavy snowstorm, we lost power. It wasn't unusual out there, so we lit a fire, made some tea on a small gas burner, and settled in for a quiet night. Around 9:30 p.m., we heard knocking at the front door. It was strange, not because someone was knocking. People do get stranded up there sometimes, but because we hadn't heard a car. No engine, no tires crunching snow, nothing. My uncle opened the front door just a bit and peeked out. I stood behind him. There was a man standing there. No hat, no gloves, no snow on him, and no expression. He looked to be in his late 30s, wearing a dark brown coat and jeans. His hands were at his sides, and he wasn't shivering, even though it was freezing and snowing hard. My uncle asked if he needed help. The man didn't answer. He just stared at both of us. Not angry, not afraid, just blank, like he wasn't really there. After a few seconds, he finally said, in a calm but unnatural voice, "My car broke down." My uncle asked where. He didn't answer, just stood there, staring past us like he was trying to look inside. I'll never forget how pale his eyes looked. They didn't blink. Something about him felt wrong. Not in a dramatic way, just off. My uncle, who's not an easily shaken man, said, "Sorry, we don't have power, and we can't really help right now. There's a gas station 10 miles down the road." The man just nodded slowly, still no emotion, then turned and walked down the steps into the snow-covered woods. We closed the door and locked it immediately. I ran to the front window to watch where he went, but he was gone. The snow outside was untouched. No footprints. We hadn't heard him leave. And there were no tire tracks anywhere near our cabin. That night, I barely slept. The next morning, we checked the surrounding area. Not a single track. No signs of anyone passing through. That would have been the end of it. But then my uncle told me something that made my skin crawl. He said the same thing had happened before. Years ago, different man. Same stare. Same phrase. Same vanishing act. A few people in the area had told stories like that too about the visitor. Always during a snowstorm. Always knocking. Always walking away without a trace. This happened last year when I was living in a small apartment in Brooklyn. It was just a basic one-bedroom in an older building. Creaky floors, thin walls, the usual. I lived alone, and by that point I was used to the occasional late-night noise from neighbors or someone buzzing the wrong apartment. But this night was different. It was around 2:15 a.m., and I was dead asleep when the doorbell rang. Not the buzzer from downstairs, my actual apartment doorbell. It startled me awake instantly. I laid there in the dark, confused, trying to decide if I'd imagined it. Then it rang again. Short, sharp. Ding dong. I got up and checked the peephole. No one. The hallway was empty and silent. I didn't open the door, just stood there for a minute listening. No footsteps. No voices. Nothing. I went back to bed, a little freaked out, but assuming it was some drunk neighbor messing around. Then, at 2:37 a.m., it rang again. Same doorbell. Same eerie silence outside. I grabbed a kitchen knife and checked the peephole again. Still nothing. No movement. No sound. But this time, I noticed something that sent a chill through me. There was no camera feed. My door has a little smart peephole camera that records motion. It logs a few seconds of video anytime someone comes near the door. I opened the app to check the footage, and there was nothing. Not just no video, like it had been turned off. It didn't make sense. The app showed every package delivery, every neighbor walking past during the day. But the doorbell had rung twice, and there was no data. I stayed up after that, lights on, knife by my side. Nothing else happened that night. The next day, I called the building manager. He said no one had reported anything weird, but he offered to check the hallway footage from the building's main camera, the one at the end of the hall. When he got back to me, his voice was a little shaky. He told me that around 2:15 and again around 2:35, someone stood in front of my door. But here's the part that made my stomach drop. The person never touched the door. They just stood there, looking at it, and then they walked away. He sent me a screenshot, a grainy image of a man in a hoodie, hands in his pockets, standing still with his head tilted slightly to the side. You could barely see his face. I asked how the doorbell rang if he never touched anything. The manager had no answer. He said it looked like the guy was just standing there. I ended up changing my lock and disabling the internal bell, just using my phone app after that. But here's the part one don't really tell people. 2 weeks later, I got curious and started looking up Bluetooth vulnerabilities for smart doorbells. Turns out, if someone knows what they're doing, they can connect to certain models and trigger them remotely. The creep had never needed to touch my door. He had stood there in silence, watching, waiting, and he rang the bell from his phone. It happened 2 winters ago, during Christmas break, when I was 17. My parents had gone out of town to visit my grandparents, but I stayed home because I had a part-time job and didn't want to lose the extra holiday hours. We live in a small, quiet town in Minnesota where nothing much ever happens. It had snowed the night before, and everything outside was coated in a thick white blanket. I remember it was around 12:45 a.m. when it started. I was in my room upstairs, watching YouTube with headphones on, when I felt a faint vibration. I took off my headphones and realized someone was knocking at the front door. At first, I figured it was maybe a neighbor or something. Maybe someone's car had broken down, or they needed help. I went downstairs, flipped on the porch light, and looked through the peephole. There was no one there. At first, I thought maybe I imagined it, but just as I started to turn away, there was another knock, louder this time, but still off, not like a normal knock. It was slow, deliberate. I looked again. Still no one. I opened the front door, just a crack, and looked around. The porch was empty. The driveway was clear. No cars, no footprints in the snow. Nothing. I closed the door, locked it again, and sat in the living room for a few minutes, just listening. I even turned off the lights to see better through the window. Then, about 5 minutes later, it started again. This time louder. Knock. 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 I froze. I didn't want to go back to the door, but I had to. I crept over slowly, looked through the peephole. Still no one. but the knocking continued. It didn't stop. That's when I noticed something else. There was a faint scratching noise, like something being dragged across wood. I got a sick feeling in my stomach. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering into the receiver. The dispatcher told me to stay inside and not open the door. They'd send someone right away. I stayed on the line, crouched behind the couch, just watching the door from across the room. The knocking had stopped, but now I could hear the scratching again. It went on for another minute, then everything just stopped. Silence. About 7 minutes later, I saw red and blue lights flash through the windows. I ran to open the door for the officer, and that's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There were deep, curved knife marks on the wood around the doorframe. 3 of them, in the exact spot someone would stand to the left of the door, just out of view of the peephole. The snow on the porch was undisturbed. No footprints. No signs of someone walking up or leaving. The cop was baffled. He did a sweep around the property, but there was nothing. No signs of a person anywhere. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I checked the door again in daylight. The knife marks were even deeper than I remembered, almost like someone was digging into the house. My parents came back 2 days later, and we replaced the entire front door not long after. I still don't know what they wanted, or why they didn't just try to break in. But sometimes, I think maybe they didn't want to get in. Maybe they just wanted me to open the door. If you made it this far, maybe you belong here. Subscribe to WhisperCage. More true horror is waiting.